Well, folks, let's begin. I know that there's some participants that will still be joining us as we go along. Uh, you've joined the National Watershed Coalition webinar on Preliminary Investigation Feasibility or Findings Reports, PIFRs, the Mastery, Navigating PIFR Preparation. Some logistics for today. One is our webinar ID is 814-855-69179. You're going to get the most out of this if you come on to your computer and not try to use your telephone today. All the lines are going to be muted for our participants except for the presenters. That's what makes the questions area via the web the most important feature that you'll be using today during this webinar. The Zoom Q&A feature is down on your Zoom dashboard, and you'll be using that as the entry for questions for our presenters today. We're going to get to as many of these questions as we can. We had about 40 questions that came in during the registration process. And during that process, we were able to share that with the presenters, and they've included answers to many of the questions that you had forwarded. The webinar will be recorded. That's always the first question that we get. So again, the webinar will be recorded, but your participation in this throughout the entire webinar is very important. 2 hours worth of great investment. Feedback is welcome. Kudos, comments, any improvements that we can make, just go ahead and email that address there, rayledgerwood@msn.com. I'll collect those and make sure we get those to the National Watershed Coalition folks. Speaking of that, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce our National Watershed Coalition Chair, Tina Hendon, for a few words, and then we'll go to Dan for a few words. Tina?
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope everyone's settled in for a great presentation. You can, the next slide, please. All right. I'm pleased to share some of the thoughts and activities around the National Watershed Coalition, tell you a little bit about who we are. My name is Tina Hendon. I'm the chair. I'm located in Texas. Gene Sarborn is vice chair, and he's located in West Virginia. Lisa is our past chair, who I depend on a lot for knowledge and institutional insight. She's in Oklahoma, and Barb Ulchin is our treasurer. She is in Kansas, and of course our executive director, our leadership, is Dan Siebert, and he is also in Oklahoma. All right, what do we do? The National Watershed Coalition was formed in 1989. We're made up of national, regional, state, local organizations, associations, and individuals. We have 3 focus areas. We provide assistance and consultation to our members, the watershed sponsors, partner organizations, NASCA, and of course, USDA and RCS. Our second focus, back up. Can you back up this a little bit? Gotcha. Our second focus is to provide information and serve as a source of educational expertise on the watershed program. To watershed education and information to the U.S. Congress has been one of our frequent activities. We spend a lot of time keeping our leadership in D.C. Educated and aware of all the issues that they need to work on, and issues that some of our sponsors and partners have. The third area is that we spend a lot of resources through a cooperative contribution agreement with the USDA and RCS, working across the country, producing educational materials, webinars, on-site trainings, and we just signed a new 2-year agreement to deliver additional timely and relevant training and information. Some of those resources that we've developed, you can find on our website. Excuse me. Our upgraded website has some new features. You can now pay dues or register for events online. We have some new fact sheets up there, so be sure you check out our website and Facebook and like us and engage with us. Some of the accomplishments that you can find there, COVID sure did allow us to enhance our options for virtual trainings and meetings. So you can find some webinars there. Over the past 24 months, we've reached more than 1,500 people with just 8 webinars. And of course, this one is going to up our numbers quite a bit now. You can find information on how to use the program and fund your projects. There's inspections, information about easements, selling conservation and watershed work. And of course, recorded webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So let us hear from you. There's all the ways you can contact with us and look for us on Facebook and YouTube and interact with us there. Thank you all for coming, and I'll turn it back over to Ray.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate that very much. And if you've got your pen out and a piece of paper, go ahead and write down those addresses, the email, website, phone number for our National Watershed Coalition. We appreciate your opening comments. Also, I want to give a chance, Dan, if you had any opening comments right now too. I want to make sure we cover those.
Thank you, Ray. I do want to reiterate what Tina said and Ray said. Welcome. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to participate in this webinar. I'm very excited about the partnership with USDA NRCS and Jones DeMille that brought this all together. As Tina mentioned, webinars became more of a focus as we were limited for in-person things. The bright spot here is I first heard the material you'll hear today at an in-person meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I just was struck by the opportunity that was there in terms of expanding what was done during that meeting to a broader audience. So I'm excited you're here. I appreciate the prep time that these folks that will present have put in. The most important resource in the National Watershed Coalition happens to be our members. And so we would invite you to join us. You can go to the website and see the types of things that we do. We're always available to chat. You see the number there on your screen. But I would invite you to become a member and to help support advancement of the watershed program. With that, Ray, I think we're ready to hear from the experts.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that very much. And Tina, your opening comments. Our purpose today is to navigate, to show mastery, navigating the PIFR preparation. And you're going to be discovering innovative solutions, as Dan mentioned, gaining invaluable insights into the preparation of the preliminary investigation feasibility or findings reports. The session promises to streamline your processes, encourage broad participation. You can learn and really enhance your activities in this arena. So as Dan mentioned, we've got some outstanding presenters today, just upcoming. So grab a piece of paper. Sometimes you'll want to write a few things down, something to write with, but use that question and answer system in that Zoom dashboard. And thanks to Anna for getting us started on the right foot. She asked whether or not we would have this up on the webinar, up on the website, the National Watershed Coalition website. And yes, it will be there. Dan, it does take a little while, if I remember right, to get it transformed into a good format. And so give Dan a little bit of time and his people a little bit of time to get that up there, usually up there within, what, a couple of weeks maybe, Dan? Is that pushing it too much? I got a big nod, so that's good. All right. So use that questions dashboard, not the chat. Use the quick Q&A area where our presenters can actually go in and answer those questions as they finish. It's my opportunity now to introduce one of the speakers today and principal at Jones and DeMille, Darren Robinson, to introduce our presentation panel. Darren?
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that. On behalf of the team, I'd just like to thank the NWC for this opportunity. We've been excited about this, and we've a little background on us. We've had the privilege of working closely with NRCS folks and project sponsors and stakeholders from 10 states across the West. and during that time, we've completed over 50 PIFRs. I didn't get the exact number, but it's between 50 and 60 PIFRs. And so our team's purpose for this webinar is to share some of the basics, as well as some tips and insights that we've learned as we've helped to successfully navigate this PIFR process. And the team we've selected, if you want to go to the next slide there, starting out with Blancshia, we have a well-rounded team. Blancshia is a Colorado NRCS watershed program specialist. She's awesome. We've worked closely with her to prepare, I don't know what we're up to, close to 9 or 10 PIFRs in her state. And she's a great example of an active watershed program specialist that communicates well with sponsors. We're going to talk a lot about that. Next person is Jenna Jorgensen, our environmental coordinator. We like to refer to her as our NEPA ninja, kind of an inside thing, but we're going to share that with you today. She's great. She understands NEPA inside and out. She communicates well, helps keep us engineers on track and think through the process, and always keep that in mind. Ricky Anderson, he's our lead engineer for these PIFRs, has managed a number, the majority of those PIFRs, and he has a soft voice, but he carries a big technical stick. He's super sharp, and hope you can gain some things from him. So that's our team. We're excited, and we hope you learned something from this. And I tell other people this as well. We enjoy our association with both the NWC and the NRCS, and feel like we're a bit of an extension to help both navigate their programs, but also increase awareness and help people through different programs within the NRCS. So with that, I'll kick it over to the team.
Thank you, Darren.
Good, Jen.
Jenna, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. We'd like to have as much interaction as possible, so we have set up a polling program. This is Mentimeter. So if you want to join and participate, join us at menti.com and use the code 53233494 to be able to submit your responses. We'll just give you one more minute there. Again, that was menti.com. And the code is 53233494. All right, our first poll. What does PIFR stand for? Oh, darn it. Well, you can tell which one has been selected, it looks like. Your options were A, Preliminary Investigation Findings Report, B, Please implement federal regulations, C, Preliminary Investigation Feasibility Report, and D, Planning to improve flood risk. Okay, so we are seeing some results.
Kind of a trick question.
This one is nuanced, and we're going to turn it over to Blancshia. Tell us, what is a PIFR?
Yeah, so what is a PIFR? Next slide. So a PIFR first stands for Preliminary Investigation and Findings Report. It's part of the Watershed and Flood Operations Program, which helps units of federal, state, local, and federally recognized tribal governments or project sponsors protect and restore watersheds. It's a multi-phased approach, which funds are requested at the beginning of each phase. This helps us ensure our costs are accurate when we move forward to requesting funding for a project phase. This process starts with the PIFR. The PIFR is what we consider a pre-planning phase. Overall, the PIFR looks at if the programmatic requirements of the PL 566 program have been met and we have reasonable, environmentally defensible, and achievable solutions that will treat the resource concerns in the watershed. After a PIFR is completed, if it is recommended forward, it will move on to the planning phase. In the planning phase, the watershed plan and environmental decision document is developed. This can be an environmental assessment, EA, or an environmental impact statement. Once the final watershed plan and environmental decision document is completed and authorized, the design phase may begin. In this phase, the project measures will be brought into final design. Finally, we have this when the design is complete, the project can begin construction, which is everybody's favorite part. Next slide. So what is a PIFR? Well, to begin with, it stands for Preliminary Investigation and Findings Report. If you Google PIFR, P-I-F-R, you will probably find Preliminary Investigation and Feasibility Report, which is what we previously called the document. Looking at what a PIFR is, the name has changed from Feasibility Report to Findings Report because overall, the PIFR looks at the big picture. Feasibility implies much more detail. We're not looking at economics or hydrology or looking really in depth or, et cetera, things like that. Findings is more of a big picture, quick look using available data. Is there a viable project that will meet all the concerns in the watershed? What's in a PIFR? Well, first, it's a brief study using existing data. We won't really be developing any new data, and we'll use what is already on hand. In the PIFR, there's no new analysis, and we're looking at key programmatic and statutory requirements. It must meet at least one of the authorized purposes in the PL 566 program. The document is an internal NRCS document and provides reasonable assurance that the project is feasible and has no insurmountable obstacles before we go into planning. What it's not a watershed plan. Those take a lot more time and a lot more money. It isn't full engineering design, which is a product of the design phase. It's not a complete evaluation of all of the possible measures in the alternatives, and it's not a guarantee for future funding. Next slide. So where do we start? Next. So where to start? First, identify your problem. Here are the authorized purposes in the watershed program: flood prevention, watershed protection, public recreation, public fish and wildlife, agricultural water management, municipal and industrial water supply, and water quality management. Is there an authorized purpose to solve it? Next slide. So what do they cover? To start off, flood protection. Flood protection prevents or reduces flooding, erosion, and sediment damage. You can flood-proof structures in the floodplain, remove property from the floodplain, reduce the frequency, depth, or velocity of flooding, or prevent encroachment in the floodplain. Jenna, would you like to give us some examples?
Yeah, we have a couple of current watershed plans that do have a flood prevention authorized purpose. So just to illustrate some of the things that we're considering, we're looking at construction of new detention basins, conveyance channels, whether they're being upgraded or piped, and relocating structures out of inundation areas. These are all measures that meet that purpose.
Right, watershed protection. So watershed protection is upland treatments to cure the downstream problems, such as flooding, erosion, sedimentation, pollutants. We can also do ecosystem restoration type activities, as well as land treatment practices to conserve or develop soil, water quality and quantity, forestry, or fish and wildlife habitats. Jenna, would you like to give some examples of watershed protection you've worked on?
Yes, in a couple of our active watershed plans. One example is we are looking at upgrades to an existing diversion structure to improve water quality for a downstream hydroelectric facility. We have another project that is primarily flood prevention, but we have the opportunity to also improve aquatic habitat by removing some fish passage barriers. So we're considering an additional authorized purpose of watershed protection.
Nice. The next authorization is public recreation. In this authorization, the local sponsor will provide an area for public recreation. NRCS can cost share on some of the basic facilities needed for public health and safety. The sponsor provides needed access, water, and power for these facilities. And examples of recreational facilities include picnics, sanitary facilities, fish piers, shelters, cooking grills, parking areas, access roads, trails, or swimming beaches. Next slide. The next authorized purpose is public fish and wildlife. In this authorization, the local sponsor will provide an area for fish and wildlife access. We can also do habitat improvements and fish and wildlife development. Next slide. Okay, agricultural water management. Ag water management covers irrigation projects, water conservation, water quality improvement, groundwater recharge, ag water supply, including to rural communities, and drainage. Jenna, would you like to give some examples?
Yeah, a few illustrations for this purpose. We are considering piping and lining of several canals, reconstructing or constructing new storage reservoirs, and replacing deficient diversion structures all meet that purpose.
Okay, the next is municipal and industrial water supply. This authorization provides storage capacity in reservoirs for M&I use. We can do some outlet works and pipeline to the distribution center. However, it does not include municipal and industrial wells, as well as water treatment plants or water distribution systems. Next slide. The next authorization is water quality management. This authorization provides water storage capacities in reservoirs for regulating of stream flow to improve water quality. Next slide.
Well, I have one example here that I kind of wanted to highlight. We have a reservoir in Utah that would meet this purpose, but we're considering it under watershed protection because the stream flows would support improvement of habitat for listed fish species downstream. So there can be a lot of overlap between authorized purposes too, especially with watershed protection and agricultural water management and water quality. So the PL 566 program is really pretty broad in what it can fund. It's almost easier to define what can't be funded. Real property acquisition is the big one. That is the sole responsibility of the sponsor. Real property acquisition includes obtaining land, water, or mineral rights and any permits. The limited exceptions allow for cost share on conservation easements or habitat mitigation. So opportunities are limited with most of the projects I've seen. Another excluded item would be storm and sanitary sewers or relocations and changes to existing sewer facilities in urban or built up areas. Those are also the sole responsibility of the sponsor. Changes to utilities are considered real property. For example, we've had to relocate power poles to accommodate a new detention basin, that dam. That's considered real property and a cost that the sponsor has to take. Roads and railroads and their channel crossings are typically real property acquisition. That can be a big deal. And then assistance with removal of waste is also prohibited as stated in the NRCS's National Engineering Manual. So these items can be part of a plan, but they can't be funded by PL 566, but often they're an integral part of the overall proposal, so they're still considered. All right, our next Mentimeter. Which is your preferred authorized purpose? There's no right or wrong answer here. So we have flood prevention, watershed protection, public recreation, public fish and wildlife, agricultural water management, municipal and industrial water supply, and water quality management. Well, the results aren't coming up, but I hope you all have a preferred authorized purpose and understand the opportunities there with that.
So getting the right people involved. The watershed process really prospers on a collaborative approach. Getting the right groups involved early on in the process is key. Examples in no particular order are the local field office with the NRCS. They're usually in the know of who is who in the local area and what are, the projects or problems going on in the local area. Another group is the local watershed groups. These can be irrigation districts, soil and water conservation districts, water conservancy districts, local water groups. These are your groups that, may either have your list of, projects, potential projects in the area, or even they could be potential sponsors. Next, if a sponsor or, if a sponsor isn't an eligible proponent for a project, it may be one of the groups mentioned earlier. Is there an eligible sponsor who would be willing to take responsibility for a project? And last are the affected landowners and agencies, especially out in the West with land management agencies. Do they have maybe projects that may be eligible for PL 566? And is there agency or landowner support for these projects? Once you kind of circle through these, you typically have, a project that's maybe ready for PL 566 assistance. And you can send a letter requesting assistance to your state con. An example that we've had is in the San Luis Valley in Rio Grande, Colorado. It starts off with, it started out with a local water conservancy district reaching out to the local NRCS field office with interest in the PL 566 program, which put them in contact with the state staff. And they included projects that were, in the field office that exceeded the capabilities of our Farm Bill programs and sounded like they might be a good fit for this program. In that project, 2 additional water conservancy districts came together to be the project's secondary sponsors led by the original conservancy district so that they could support all the local conservation efforts in this project. There was also support from the local conservation district as well as our local basin roundtables. Through these groups working collectively, we were able to be provided with a large library of data that was really helpful for us in developing the PIFR. Overall, through the sponsors' collaborative efforts, they were able to efficiently utilize their time, resources, and manpower to handle a project of this size. And I foresee that, this project will be a really successful project in the future. Jenna, you want to give another example?
Yes, just to emphasize, this is a critical step to set you up for success in the next phase. We have a slightly less positive example. We were working on a funded watershed plan, and the proponents were eager to participate, but we didn't have support from the sponsor, and the watershed plan was canceled because we couldn't get the sponsor to participate in the way that they needed to. So this is the opportunity to get your project partners moving in the same direction. And we'll take a break for questions.
Thanks, Jenna and B. Some outstanding material. Let's take the first question. And does the residential environmental remediation, for example, mold remediation from past floods, count as an authorized purpose? So Jenna, B, either one of you want to take that particular question on?
My initial reaction would be no. the project is for flood damage prevention. And if the damage has already happened, seems like that would be outside the scope of this program. But I'm not the NRCS, and that's not my decision to make.
I would second that, Jill. The keyword is flood prevention. While this sounds like it's more remediation work.
All right, thank you. A few of our folks made notes that the poll sheets are not updating. We're working on that and hoping that it would come up. We did have a question regarding sanitary sewer infiltration and overflow is an issue. Can the Public Law 566 fund studies and repairs? You kind of crossed over to Public Law 566 things. And what about the sanitary sewer infiltration and overflow being an issue?
That still sounds to me like
Yeah.
it's one of those excluded items.
You're right,
There
Jenna.
may be a nuance, but just from the brief information we've got, I would think that would be outside of the program scope.
And just to add to that, with the understanding that that infiltration is coming through joints or some sort of leaks in the pipeline, is our understanding of what sanitary sewer infiltration would be. If that were overland flood flows that flowed into manholes during an event, then and cause damage, then it would maybe make a little more sense that could be investigated. But good questions.
Okay.
Very unique.
All right. Let's move to recreational purposes for just a bit here. Would a trail construction project along a railroad in one section and along a canal in another section with no underlying improvements to the canal, but as a part of a larger project where canal improvements are occurring in other areas of the project, could it be a project area be authorized under a PL 566? Recreational purposes, trail construction, project along a railroad and a canal, but no underlying improvements to the canal. Go ahead.
We have asked this question before.
Yep.
We didn't feel that it fit under the public recreation purpose, but watershed protection does allow for the development and conservation of recreation. And some of the practice codes include construction of a trail. So it's a little bit of a stretch. I don't know that that has been carried forward to NRCS leadership to see if that approach would work, but I think someone's going to be asking it soon.
Also want to make note that for some of these questions that our presenters, are wanting to get a little more information on, you're asking them, point blank right on the spot here. We're going to collect these questions. They'll go to the National Watershed Coalition office and then also be forwarded to NRCS for more in-depth answers to some of your questions you have. So the presenters may be able to tackle some of these, and some of them are going to be packaged and brought forward to our folks at the national headquarters level. All right. How about an example of a project where local drinking water utility and source water collaborative partnered to work on a watershed protection practices? Examples of a project, local drinking water utility, source water collaborative, partnered to work with a watershed protection practices that would benefit the drinking water.
I'm trying to think if we have an example. And right off the top of my head, I can't think of any. Anyone else have thoughts on that? I will say that we've talked around the idea. Agricultural water management may be used for drinking water in rural areas. is my understanding based on direction from other NRCS staff. So it sounds like there's an opportunity there for sure. Dig a little deeper and possibly make that work.
Okay. How about from the area new storm, from the manual storm and sanitary sewers, new storm and sanitary sewers and relocations and changes to existing sewer facilities in urban and build-up areas are the sole responsibility of SLO. And that's a wonderful acronym that B is probably going to tell us what the SLO stands for. And Tara was able to pull that up from the manual. Go ahead.
Yeah, the SLO is the sponsor, the local sponsor. So it is their responsibility to take care of, storm drains, sewers, those type of things. Thank you.
All right. I want to also and I know you're going to cover some of this later on too. How are the PIFRs funded? Are they funded on a first come, first served? Or are they funded cyclically? How long does it take to fund a PIFR request?
So, PIFRs, they're funded, first, a state may have local prioritization. So, they could have a ranking system in state, on, maybe priorities, that they've set locally. And then once they're recommended up to national headquarters, it can take anywhere from, a few months to 6 months to get funded, depending on what time of the year it falls in to get funded. Once a PIFR is funded, it still takes time for, if an IDIQ contract is secured, to administer that contract, or if it's done in state, those NRCS staff members can get started on that PIFR.
Got some excellent questions. Are you still willing to take on a couple more here?
Do we have time, Ray?
Gonna take on a couple more. How about capturing stormwater and diverting it to tankage for fire protection as an eligible item?
Tough one.
The question says we may end up sending that one along to our other folks. Huh? And can stream restoration be included in an authorized use? Let's tackle that one. Under perhaps water protection, fish and wildlife habitats.
That is correct, Ray.
Can be, huh? All right.
Yep.
Very good. So one individual said that he's got several PIFRs in the works that the sponsor is hesitant to take to a completion date due to fear of funding being required. Can you go over that? If anything, the sponsor, if financially obligated to do, if they complete the WS4. So that's kind of that want to piece that I know you're going to be talking about too, the sponsorship, who sponsors it, how much of an alliance you build, how much want to and resources and that sort of thing. So just to repeat, several PIFRs in the works. Sponsor is hesitant to take completion date due to fear of funding being required. And talk a little bit about that, your experiences in that area.
Yeah. So, in the PIFR stage, they don't really have any money they need to put forward. This kind of carries through in the planning and design stage for the most part. They would have to pay for, any permitting costs that are required during those stages, but that would probably occur later on in the planning and design stage if needed. That being said, it is a tough conversation you have to have with a sponsor that, are they capable of, providing or securing the match for these? It's kind of difficult to, push it through, but once they get the conversation started on early on, I feel like that's really helpful in the PIFR because, you could work with, maybe local or state government to help them secure that match. There are a variety of ways, that you can secure that match. And so the earlier, you get them started about the responsibility later on, because it is required in the F4 that they would be providing the local share of cost share that's required in this program. The sooner, it kind of can mull over and they can really strategize their options on securing that match.
Thank you, Bean. We'll hang on to the rest of the questions then as we go along. I know that you've got more program to give here, some of which may answer some of these questions that came up, but we'll make sure that we do cover those at the next break for questions. Back to you, Jenna and B.
Yeah. So what happens next? Next slide. So the NRCS pre-screens the project based on local prioritization. And then once we've kind of locally prioritized it, a funding request is sent. Once these funds are received, the PIFR can be completed by either the state NRCS office, or it can be done with a regional IDIQ contract where we hire, a consultant like Jones and DeMille to complete the PIFR. Typically, on average, it costs about $50,000 to do one of these PIFRs and takes about 90 days to complete. If you're getting multiple PIFRs done, we do them in batches and stagger them by a few weeks. Slide.
Okay, well, there's another poll with the answer already shown, but the poll's not working anyway. So, what is the size limit for a project with a flood prevention purpose? 250,000 acres. The Army Corps of Engineers has jurisdiction when you go over that limit. There's also a threshold. So a single structure with more than 12,500 acre feet of floodwater detention capacity or 25,000 acre feet of total capacity. When we start a PIFR, there are some high-level criteria that we look at first. So what is the watershed size and purpose? Basically, are we within the jurisdictional limits for the program? That question about the acre feet storage, if it's above those limits, it's outside the jurisdiction of this program. There's also a limit on how many recreational developments can be included in the plan, and it depends on the size of your watershed area. So for a watershed project that is less than 75,000 acres, you can have one recreation development. You can have two if you're between 75,000 and 150,000 acres, or up to 3 developments in a project of more than 150,000 acres. Will the project take place in a special designated area? Special designated areas have special commissions with statutory authorities, and they need to be informed and involved if one of the projects happens in their area. Another question is, will the project benefit communities or groups of landowners? We have had watershed plans where individual project measures were excluded because they would only serve a single user and not a group. So they didn't meet the program requirements. We were able to keep the other measures that did serve the larger group. Can the project be installed under other programs? If so, you probably want to use those other programs. They're probably going to be a lot faster. Will the project have local support? The watershed plans are a group effort, and you've got to have that support or willingness to use the authority that the sponsor has to successfully implement a plan. And here's a big question. Can the project achieve at least 20% agricultural/rural benefits? According to the NRCS Watershed Manual, rural means less than 50,000 people in the last census. That happens every 10 years. So if you're in a rural community, all the benefits count as rural. But what if you're not in a rural area? So one illustration, we started a plan in Utah in 2020 that was in 2 rural communities. But when the census results came out in 2021, one of the communities was no longer rural, it was urban. So we had to remove some project measures out of that community so that the benefits in the adjacent rural community would make up a larger share of the total benefits. So the remaining 80% of the benefits were still in the urban area, but we were able to meet that 20% requirement. So there are creative ways that we have found to meet that rural requirement. Typically, we can find a way to shape a project to meet these criteria. There's a lot of flexibility especially in the PIFR stage, to make a project eligible. And it's time for another break for questions.
All right, very good. Thank you. Well, to capture these a little bit at a time, I also see that Bronson is answering some of the questions. This ability of the Zoom Q&A, please use that, not the chat, not the raise the hand. We're going to just use the Q&A today. And then that allows our presenters to be able to come in and answer some of the questions as we go along. Some of our also the folks that are on our panel that aren't speaking yet are still answering some of the questions. All right, here we go, guys. If an agricultural irrigation ditch has historically failed flooded forest land, could that be considered under flood prevention? Back to some of the questions regarding the examples you gave about all of those cool things you can use a PIFR for.
I guess, Jenna, do you want me to take that one?
Oh, go ahead, Blanquia.
Yeah, I would say it depends. So it could, it really, looks down to what is the intent of, that project. Are we, piping it to protect it from flood, or, are we doing improvements to the canal because it's deteriorating and we're wanting to improve the ag water access to, the users? I'd really take a look at, what your intent of doing that project is. So
just to add to
Jenna?
what Blanc, I have something to add to that as well. The economics may not work out if all you're doing is protecting forest land. So that could be a determining factor as well. If you're not protecting critical infrastructure through that effort, whatever the proposed action is, I'm guessing the economics may not work out if you're protecting forest land where it naturally floods.
Very good, Darren. Thank you. Yeah.
Another thought is we will often look at the benefits. If we can quantify monetary benefits for both flood prevention and ag water management, we may prorate the purpose based on those benefits. And then you would get the respective cost shares on those. I guess the project would be split. So there are a lot of ways to approach that.
Excellent. So let's stay on that flood purpose for just a bit, Jenna. You got to stay on that line. And do you have to include the entire watershed area in a defined watershed for flood prevention? An example that they gave is the Lower Bear River or Lower Malad River in Utah for flood prevention. And do you have to go the entire river watershed, or can you do a sub-watershed, a defined watershed area? What's the deal, especially as you get up to that threshold of 250,000 acres?
We have a great recent example, and I may pass that to Ricky. Would you like to talk through what we're doing in Idaho right now, Ricky?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we have a PIFR in Idaho that could be similar to the example that was brought up in the question. It included some levee structures and a diversion that's on the main street stretch of a river with a watershed that is a lot bigger than 250,000 acres. And in discussing with the NRCS and looking at the criteria, what was determined was that because the watershed was greater than that, draining to that point, that it wouldn't be eligible because of that size limit. And so just adding to that as well, I mean, other different things you can include in a watershed plan wouldn't require looking at the overall watershed, but if you think about it from a analysis perspective and the watershed plan, we would be doing the hydrology and hydraulics for that entire watershed, which could affect the structure. And so that's all included in the same watershed plan. So you're evaluating everything that could affect the structure that's providing flood protection.
Thanks, Ricky, Jenna, B, very good. I see some questions here that I know Ricky's gonna take on, probably better when we talk about some of the flow and the timing and that sort of thing. But there is one that I think we should take on right now, and that is, at what part of the process does the SLO have to prove they have match funds to pay their share?
I would say probably in the design phase. Usually, design phase, it takes about a year. So once you get to construction, that's when your match would kick in, and you'd be, required to cover whatever the cost share rate the sponsor is required. So, you want to get your ducks in a row before you start construction.
And
Very
if I could add to that, we do try to identify obstructing factors during the PIFR process. If it's clear that the sponsor doesn't have a path toward coming up with the match on a given project, that could be viewed as an obstructing factor and would go into the internal state ranking of that PIFR advancing for planning money as well.
Very good. So one of the, go ahead, Ricky.
If I could add to that, in the watershed planning phase, there's a lot of time for that step. It's 2 to 3 years to get through an EA or EIS. And we see a lot of sponsors get nervous about the same question, so you're certainly not alone. That WS4 form is more of an acknowledgement that those things could be required, and you'll be considering that in the watershed planning phase. But the watershed program itself is really great at bringing people together on a global solution. And so what I've seen is when there are opportunities for multiple people to be involved in a project, opportunities for match funding also come up. And we have a lot of projects where there's funds coming from different sources to help pay for one overall project. And that's the great thing about this program. And my humble opinion is just that public process that's facilitated to help build those partnerships and come up with solutions. So I guess just main takeaway, I wouldn't let that scare you off. I would think of that more as an opportunity to bring more people on board.
So our panelists have probably had, I'm going to take one more question here and pose it to our panelists. Have you had a PIFR that was completed and the project did not meet the requirements? And kind of what did you do at that point?
We've had a few, and it varies by state. So we had one in Nevada that we realized early on was not going to work out. And they had us just stop the PIFR at that point and provide the rationale. But I know when we had something similar in Colorado, Blanccia asked us to complete the PIFR so that we had more documentation and still looked at the opportunities and showed that we had done a hard look.
Thanks, Jenna. Very good. Okay, let's go back to the program. We've not lost your questions, and we appreciate you using the Q&A area of your dashboard. No need to use the chat, no need to use the hand raise. We're just going to use the Q&A. That allows our presenters and our experts to be able to queue in and answer your questions on the fly, even as we're doing other presentations. So Jenna and Ricky.
Yeah, Ricky is now going to share some insights from one of the main components of a PIFR, the engineering effort.
Thanks, Jenna. So this first slide that I wanted to show you, well, maybe before we go there, Darren introduced me. I'm a water resources engineer by training, and I've also managed a lot of these projects. And so as I thought about what would be most helpful from an engineering perspective, I thought also just about what drives the process forward in the short period of 90 days it's required with these PIFRs. And so I thought I'd just peel back the curtain a little bit and show you what we used to drive these projects. And what we're showing on the screen right now is a tool that I developed more in terms of project management, but I'll focus more on the engineering aspects of it. But just keep in mind that it does overlap in terms of the slides that will be presented after and have been presented so far. And I can point that out a little bit. But with that said, you know, this template that we'll be sharing doesn't necessarily follow the exact way it's represented in the scope of work. It's really meant to facilitate lessons learned, critical discussions, and just focusing on the delivery of the PIFR and what we need from a consultant side to produce this report in 90 days. So with that said, we've broken up a PIFR into 3 different phases. As you can see, phase 1, focusing on data collection, among other things. Phase 2, alternatives development. And phase 3 is to finalize the PIFR. And one thing to note here is just the time period for each of these different steps. And I'll bring that up in the following slides. So this table that you can see on the screen breaks down each of the critical items in delivering a PIFR. And just to kind of explain what's here, you can see going from left to right, we've noted which items are meetings, tasks, and which ones apply directly to a section in the PIFR report itself. Then we have the task or item description, a percent complete or date of a specific meeting, an applicable PIFR report reference, and then we have a description of what that item is. And starting right there at the top, you can see there are a couple of meetings that come up right away. One of the ones noted here is a regular progress meeting that as a consultant, we meet with the state NRCS office on a regular basis. Typically that's every 2 weeks. And they, at least under our current IDIQ contract with the NRCS, they manage us as a consultant in the delivery of these PIFRs and help us along the way. And
Ricky, if I might break in just for a bit, there's one question that's just kind of with that slide up that might be easily answered. If they're completing a PIFR in-house and realize the project is won't be eligible, can they stop somewhere along the line here in the phases? Where do you stop completing the whole? Can you stop prior to completing the whole document? Can you? Yeah. Is there an exit ramp? It will be my paraphrase of this question. And where is it? Yeah.
That's a good question to ask with this slide up, actually. And so thanks for bringing that up, Ray. And just adding to what Jenna was saying, what she described was, you know, if we look at the initial screening criteria and find that there's an issue, sometimes we've been asked to stop there. Other times we feel like going further will be helpful for the NRCS and the sponsor to confirm that it is ineligible and facilitate that discussion. The items that are shown on phase 1 are those main items that occur at the beginning of a PIFR and would be the main things we look at for initial screening. So the items Jenna and Blanchia brought up are shown in this breakdown. So if we looked at this table, we note that phase 1 data collection is to be completed in 45 days. So if we see an issue, typically we would have that discussion first with the NRCS, strategize on that, look at different options and angles to make sure it is indeed ineligible, and then we would go from there.
Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate that. There's another related question while this is up. How much information is needed to be provided before NRCS begins a PIFR? Will they do the H&H? Again, this is such a good slide for kind of showing the flow, huh? Or the start of the flow.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I might wait for the next slide to answer that, but
Perfect. Yeah.
that's a great question.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
So we mentioned the regular reoccurring progress meetings. There's also other meetings as shown there in the green color. There's a pre-work meeting that's a kickoff meeting basically between the NRCS and the consultant. Usually what that's used for is establishing sponsor contact and talking about anything that the NRCS would like to explain to us at the onset of the project. And so we'll hold that meeting and then we'll get started. The NRCS often reach out to introduce us to the sponsor and request for any initial data, and then we go from there. And so the other item I'd like to point out is the data collection itself. And that relates to the question you brought up, Ray, and that is in the comments that I'll go over on the next slide. But right at the beginning, we request data from the sponsor, and we usually just do that through a link that they can upload the data to. And oftentimes as well, the state NRCS offices will have collected data that they share. That can be a good way to hit the ground running. We'll then schedule a project kickoff meeting. And in that meeting, we usually go over what a PIFR is, the overall intent, and then we talk about what to expect over the life of the project. And with that said, going back to a previous slide, collaboration, engagement with the sponsor is key. We're building a relationship ourselves with the sponsor and confirming our understanding of the needs, but it's also a way to facilitate that relationship with the NRCS. And we recognize that and make sure that that's happening beyond just kind of a data exchange, if you will. So the next thing shown on the chart are some of those initial eligibility screening criteria that was covered previously. And you'll notice down there at the bottom, second line to the bottom, as we review data and we start looking at these items, we start to get an idea of the background. We start developing an overview of the project and draft, a preliminary purpose and need statement, and pull some of those initial sections of the PIFR report together. And as we do that, one thing we're preparing for is another meeting with the sponsor and with stakeholders. And that last item at the bottom is a project understanding meeting. That's actually one that isn't explicitly written into the scope of work, but based on our experience, it's always needed. We usually use that meeting to help prepare for another meeting we'll talk about, which is a stakeholder data exchange meeting. But that meeting is a way for us to confirm our understanding and help the sponsor in reaching out to stakeholders to facilitate further discussion. So this next slide gets back to the question Ray mentioned about data, and we'll talk a little bit about analysis as well. And maybe if I could, I might provide a few examples first that can help answer that question, and then I'll answer it directly. But I was thinking of several projects as I thought about this particular question. It's one that comes up often. Every PIFR we've done has been a little bit different, but typically information is provided in one of three ways or some combination. Sometimes we send out a data request and we provide a link for them to update, send us reports, and we get lots of data, lots of reports, studies, drawings, shapefiles, all references to public websites. There can be any broad range of data that we could be given. And so it's our job as a consultant to go through all that data and look for connections between the projects. We look for things that could be relevant to issues that were described in some of the meetings. We look back at the initial PIFR request letter. We consider that a piece of data. And we also are looking at those in terms of identifying eligible actions that could be funded by the program. And so that's one way. We simply just get a whole bunch of data and we review it with the PIFR in mind. And another way that we get data is just simply verbally, and that's best being a supplement to actual hard data in a report. But I've been on PIFRs. I'm just thinking of an irrigation PIFR we did in Nevada where a lot of the information and understanding that we got was from their operator and the SCADA manager for the specific irrigation company. And we had several calls with him just to confirm our understanding and make sure we had all the data and what were the project needs. So he helped us build on the data we had and refine that and make sure we had that understanding. So some data can come verbally. And another form of communication with data is actually going back to an example that Blanchia mentioned earlier for a PIFR in central southern Colorado for Rio Grande. It was a large group, as Blanchia mentioned, and some of the success in that PIFR came because of the collaboration between all the stakeholders. But another reason was because of how they gathered data and were prepared to get started. They actually provided us reports, and then they gave us a spreadsheet that had a description of each project and what was included. And so because the watershed size was large and the group was so large, that really helped us get to the point and make sure that was included in the PIFR and spend our time wisely. And we were able to put it together a good report that represented their project. And so hopefully these examples have helped. And then in terms of the data, how much, what type is our minimum standard? You know, as mentioned earlier, a PIFR is meant to build on existing reports and data. And so we use that, and there's a limit to what we can do on top of that. So just think of it in terms of, you know, if we're able to review that and review the work that's been done, will we be able to derive enough to be able to identify a project on a map? Will we be able to put a cost estimate together and a description? Those are the three critical things that we developed from the data itself. And so when there's questions about the hydrology and hydraulics and the analysis, we don't have to have all that done for the PIFR, but we just need to be able to develop a project description and put it on a map. We know that in the watershed planning process, there'll be additional analysis done where we'll be able to dive into those details further. So it's okay if it's not all done, but we just need enough to be able to evaluate the project, is the short answer there. The other thing I would just mention as far as data goes is that if there are previous studies done, that really helps show the sponsor is ready to move forward. And that is communicated in those initial meetings. Those are some of the things that the NRCS pay attention to. And to be completely honest, sometimes in a PIFR, it's not only what we say, it's what we don't say, you know. If there's more to share, it shows the NRCS, the sponsors engaged and ready. They've been looking at these things for a while and they're ready to move forward. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. Alternatives development. So in phase one, we've collected the data. We've started to develop an understanding of the problems and possible measures for the alternative. In doing so, we started to develop an understanding of the project background and develop a description. This section of our delivery process is focused on fleshing out that alternative. and developing that description I mentioned earlier, an exhibit, clearly identifying these items on a map, which is going to help, Jenna, when she gets to the environmental, developing a cost estimate for all the measures. And with that in mind, I've listed the standard PIFR alternatives, and you'll see those listed as no federal action, structural, non-structural, and no constraints. For the most part, at these initial stages of the PIFR process, we're focused on the structural alternative. That's what the sponsors typically come requesting a PIFR to be completed for. It's the project, it's the dam, it's the lining of the canal, diversion. That's the project that they are thinking of. These other alternatives we develop as we go, but that structural alternative is the main one that is evaluated in detail throughout the PIFR. And another thing I would just mention is you'll see that there are other things in here, and we've alluded to these earlier, like facilitating factors, obstructing factors, resource concerns and opportunities, and those will be covered in some later slides by Jenna. You also notice there's one meeting here called the Key Stakeholder Data Exchange Meeting. What that is it's a larger group consisting of entities besides the sponsor with a vested interest in the project. And the goal of that meeting is really just to draw out more information about the project. It's phrased data exchange meeting for a reason. And so we work with the sponsors to identify who those individuals are. And then we hold that meeting. It's almost like a kickoff meeting because we still review what a PIFR is, but then we come to that meeting saying, here's what we understand so far based on the data we received. Do you have any questions? Do you have any other projects that would be good to include? Is there any other data that you think we're missing? And so that's the goal of that main meeting and where we get to after we have a pretty good grip on the alternatives. The last thing I'll note here on the slide is we try and be to this point within 60 days, so 2 months. We try to have held this meeting and have the alternatives pretty well fleshed out. I thought it might be helpful to show a few exhibits of projects. These aren't by any means comprehensive in terms of all of the different, they don't touch all the purposes that are authorized in the program. But I mentioned previously that we get a lot of data and a lot of reports. Sometimes we actually can just use that directly. We can take screenshots, we can use exhibits that have been created. More oftentimes than not, we actually create our own because we're bringing this data in from multiple sources. And that's what this represents, is a project that has a lot of different elements. They're all focused on irrigation system, on optimizing an irrigation system. So you can see canal lining, piping, diversions. You can see different features that are critical to that in the area. Overall, it's a relatively simple map, but it puts it all there in plain sight, goes along with the description and a cost estimate. This example is of an irrigation regulating reservoir in Colorado, and this sponsor was very focused in their request. They wanted us to look at this specific feature in their system. They had studies that they had done, selected the location, and asked us to focus on this. And so what this really shows is that you can have a PIFR that really focuses on one thing, or you can have a PIFR that's very broad and includes a lot of different features in the watershed. This is phase 3, so finalizing the PIFR. This is what we do in the last 30 days. And what we're doing at this stage is we're taking feedback we received during the stakeholder data exchange meeting, and we're updating the report. By the time we get here, we're usually, somewhere around 30 to 50% complete with the draft of the PIFR. And we're seeking to take that to 100% and prepare that draft for the state NRCS review. And you'll notice here on our breakdown that we include engineering and environmental QC. So we do internal reviews, we prepare that draft, and we get it ready for submittal. During this phase, there are other things that are happening that Jenna is going to talk about in a minute. Some of those things include additional environmental work that built on the alternative that was developed. It also includes finalizing a recommendation for the state con, and those will be covered by Jenna on the next slides. But when we're all done with the PIFR, we submit it to the state NRCS, who reviews it, gives us any comments, and then we hold that final meeting called a final review and acceptance meeting. And that's just meant to facilitate any final discussion, final comments. We usually have the final draft to them at that point that's signed and go from there.
While we're on that slide, Ricky, a question came in regarding what is the WS4 and the MS4. So we've got the WS4 up there. Maybe we should talk to that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Longshia, could I kick that over to you to describe?
Yeah, so the WS4 is the sponsor declaration document. And in that document, it first outlines who the sponsor is. And then it also, has a point of contact and project description. And what it really, everybody really looks into is they're declaring that, that they're willing to, use their powers that are needed for the program, such as eminent domain, local cost share, any land treatment type practices that may need to be done. They're really declaring in that document that they're willing to use those powers that they have to move forward with this program and process.
Thanks, B. Thanks, Ricky.
The last thing I'll mention on this slide is that once the PIFR is submitted, the NRCS typically have 14 days per the standard scope of work to review it and give us comments. And when they get the final draft, the NRCS reach out to the sponsor afterwards to give them the results and talk to them about next steps in the program. And so the sponsors don't typically hear from us, they hear from the NRCS.
Very good. Yeah, a good break for questions. And the first one that we'll tackle is in the irrigation system optimization example you gave, Ricky. How rough was that cost estimate?
The information that we had for that particular PIFR were studies that I would say were around 30 to 60% design of features. And so as far as the construction estimate, I think probably what you have in your mind is there an itemized breakdown with all the valves and the turnouts and the pipe length? We'll usually look at that and lump that into typical cost per, say, length of pipe or length of canal lining, or scale that based on the diversion structure. We try to use existing data for that, but as far as the PIFR goes, it can be, a 30% design level type cost estimate.
Very good, thank you. So can you give a good methodology for defining and developing a non-structural alternative? And as an example, for a pressurized irrigation project, how do you carry this alternative through to the analysis documentation, and to what extent? So do you ever bump into that, Ricky, where it looks like the structural pieces. Well, I know I'm asking a professional engineer, so it's kind of hard to do that, right? For a non-structural, non-engineered, piece. But have you had an example of that where, gosh, this would work, but maybe this would work better? That non-structural alternative, please.
That's actually, it's a good question and the wording is tricky. It's tied to a lot of different sections in the PIFR, including the purpose and need statement. I'm going to kick that question over to Jenna.
The non-engineer, our technician, our technical expert. Thanks, Jenna.
We have quite a few PIFRs that do not consider a non-structural alternative. We just can't come up with a feasible alternative that meets the purpose and need when we're starting with a built system, especially irrigation systems. I mean, how do you pressurize an existing canal without doing something structural? So typically we'll provide some rationale and the alternatives for why we can't meet the purpose and need. And then I will document that through, there are a series of tables in the PIFR for environmental resources, and I will just put NA in every one of them just to show consistency that this isn't applicable. There is no non-structural alternative that meets the purpose and need.
Wow. Thanks, Jenna. Really appreciate that. And Ricky, let's go back to data for just a bit. Can you elaborate a bit on the data needed to confirm whether a project will achieve at least 20% of the ag benefits? I'm not quite sure, Ricky, whether you or other panelists would want to handle this one. The source information, the data area limits, the watershed versus a project area. Talk a little bit about that, achieving the 20% ag benefits.
Well, what's coming to mind to me, and then Jenna Blancshia can jump in here, but say it's an irrigation type project, we're looking at the service area, we're looking at acreage and how much that is, as well as the watershed area itself and the population included. As far as like data to provide for that, a lot of times we're just asking those questions after we start getting the report. So it's very collaborative in terms of us asking the questions to be able to establish what the service area is, what the use or the benefits of the project are, and then defining the project area will come from that, basically the watershed area encompassing the features. And then we're looking at public data to confirm population numbers within that area. Is there anything else, Jenna or Blancshia, you're thinking about there?
The thought I had is that we don't typically run into problems with this one because we are generally looking at projects in rural areas. And as we discussed before, if it's in a rural area, all of the benefits are rural. Even if it's a 100% flood prevention project, it's rural. So it's just those rare cases where you might have an urban community, and then you might have to look at making sure the benefits are adequate in the rural areas. But there's a lot of flexibility to find a way to make that work with most of these projects because of how big they are and how many opportunities there are.
Well, thank you, Jenna and Ricky. So have you ever gone through the planning effort where structural measures, flood control had to be limited to public lands and voluntary private landowners? The asker of this question brought up eminent domain authority, zoning authority, some of that. When does it get complicated when you got some public lands involved with the private lands ownership? Any example you can give to this individual that asked this question?
Boy, eminent domain is a dirty word with local governments. There is definitely some reluctance to use that, but I would say I see the same thing. It's a critical piece. That's why it's a requirement for a sponsor. You may just have to use it if you're going to accomplish these bigger purposes. I don't want to share any specific examples, but I guess this might be the perfect time in a PIFR to realize if they're not willing. I mean, that's one of the questions on the WS4 forms. Are you willing to use your authority to do this project? And if they're not, maybe that's the answer that lets you know that this project is not ready to move forward to planning.
This reminds me of the
Or
days
you may
of,
need another sponsor.
yeah, it reminds me of the days of coordinated resource management where we had a specific set of steps that we would work a group through if they had that private lands, public lands kind of, interplay, and having them sit down and actually talk about what would it look like if it was working like it should, and what do we need in order to make that happen. So there are other methodologies out there. And some of you on the line are familiar with coordinated resource management and know those steps. So not any more about that. Any more about that, Ricky? You want to speak to the public land, private lands?
I would just add that we have a lot of projects in the watershed planning process where there is public land, there's land owned by the sponsor, and there's private land. So it's not uncommon to have elements of all of those items. I think at the PIFR stage, you would be looking for any absolute, this isn't going to work, we would have to use eminent domain here, we know this landowner won't cooperate. That would be a red flag for sure. But for some of those watershed plans where we have a landowner that's in the project area and there's just no way to avoid any impacts, we've been meeting with them regularly and working with them on a solution, and they've become a partner in the project. So everybody can, hold hands and ride into the sunset together with the right project and the right people involved.
Not every instance is a kumbaya moment, but there is one question that I love to ask a group of people that's working on a project like that. And you can write this down if you want to. I ask you to get a pen and paper out early in this webinar. What does it look like when it's working like it should? What does it look like when it's working like it should? It works for watershed health. It works for flood prevention. It works for forest management. It works for canal, replacement. What would it look like when it's working like it should? So that's kind of a fun question I'll offer to you as a group. Let's move on, Jenna. Next item.
Okay. So the environmental effort is the other main component of a PIFR. The environmental considers resource concerns and resources of special concern. There's some nuance there. The tool that's required to be used in the development of a PIFR is the CPA 52. This is a matrix in a spreadsheet that has alternatives on one axis and then the resources on the other. I will admit I did not have warm, fuzzy feelings about the CPA 52 until maybe the 20th PIFR that I worked on. So one of the questions that was asked in registration was, is the CPA 52 useful? I will now say yes. I have finally come around to it being a really useful tool to help me think critically about how to approach a project. So the first section is the resource concerns. The drop-down information in these cells helps me to identify the specific deficiencies or the need for a project. And there's often more than one because these are big projects. So this way, I can clearly separate them out. This helps me focus on the cause of the problem, which then helps me figure out the correct authorized purpose and possible solutions. So for example, if you have a problem with bank erosion, is the bank erosion the problem that is impacting water quality, or is flooding the problem that is causing bank erosion? So there's different possible solutions for those two problems depending on which way you look at it. So I like that the CPA 52 helps me break it down and clearly define my purpose and need, which is the heart of the NEPA process when you get into planning. If you're on the right track with your purpose and need, you're going to be looking at alternatives that will actually solve your problem, which is what we want. The resources of special concern focus on resources that typically have a regulatory requirement. So the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, executive orders. There's some regulatory connection with these. So my analysis doesn't typically look like a NEPA document. This is just a high level, I'm looking for regulatory hurdles. So I will include brief rationale rather than detailed analysis for why I don't think we're going to violate federal regulation if the project moves forward. Each of these resources also has a checklist on a separate tab, and that can be a little overwhelming, but the checklists for each of these resources are really helpful too, because they break it down and help you identify the different aspects of the resource that you need to consider. So for example, the Clean Water Act has specific questions to help you tease out the difference between whether you're going to have to deal with Section 404 or Section 402 or Section 303D. So again, it really helps you focus in on what the problem is so that you're coming up with solutions that would actually solve the problem. And I really like that the CPA 52 helps me thoroughly think through all of these requirements, and I don't have to remember everything. I work really well with checklists, so I don't miss something critical. The PIFR also includes a section to anticipate which level of NEPA documentation is appropriate, so that we can start the watershed planning in the right place. So one of the registrant questions was, how in-depth does the NEPA portion need to be? I typically keep this to a single paragraph. I just identify which level of documentation I think is appropriate and why. So if it meets the categorical exclusion, great. That project may get prioritized because those can go a lot faster. If we know it's going to be over 25 million, don't even mess with an EA. You're going to be wanting to start with an EIS if your cost share is over that limit. So it just helps the NRCS prepare to start the next phase in the right place. All right, another Mentimeter, if it's working, may not be. Which resource scares you the most? I'm always interested to see what kinds of experiences folks have had with regulatory resources. This tends to be the most painful part of a federal project because you do have to comply with federal regulation. It looks like it's not working, but the big three are typically cultural resources, threatened and endangered species, or waters of the US and wetlands. And we'll take another break for questions.
Thanks, Jenna. The first question that we'll take is the CPA 52 the foundation for the Plan EA or Plan EIS analysis of the proposed alternatives? Is the CPA 52 the foundation for the Plan EA and Plan EIS analysis of the proposed alternatives?
I would not start it that way. When I start a watershed plan, there are a list of required resource concerns that kind of match up, but don't entirely. But you're also looking, if you're into watershed planning, you're doing NEPA, and you're providing a detailed analysis of what the impacts are. That CPA 52 is pretty narrow. It's almost more of a yes or no. Are you going to have a regulatory issue or not? And just helps you identify those hurdles in advance. Maybe that's just me. Maybe there are others who use the CPA 52 going into the NEPA, but usually we're starting over at that point and looking more broadly anyway.
Thanks, Jenna. One note here by one of our participants is waters of the U.S. / wetlands. Not quite sure if you want to add more to that. Go ahead. That participant could add a little bit more to that, I'm sure.
I think they were just answering the question of the scariest resource.
They entered into the
Yeah.
question box.
Yeah,
Good.
where the
Thanks.
Mentimeter wasn't working. The
Ah,
hardest part. Yep.
hardest part. Excellent. Perfect. Yeah. You know, and we've got an exercise we may do too. We'll see here in just a bit. All right. Let's go on the rest of the presentation. Then I've got a question or two for our participants. So go ahead.
Okay. So once we've got a good idea of what our alternatives are and what the environmental limitations might be, we can identify the factors that make it easier or harder for an alternative to be implemented. So common facilitating factors are if the project has existing easements, if they have documented support from stakeholders, if they've got their water rights already secured. This is an opportunity for the sponsors and proponents to show the work that they've already done to make the project easier to implement. On the flip side, there are obstructing factors. So for a couple of examples, we had a PIFR in Utah, the Fremont-Caneville PIFR. It's on the east side of Capitol Reef National Park. The proponents had the water rights they needed to divert the water out of the river, but we were looking at a water storage reservoir. And there were some unanswered questions about that aspect of it. Were they able to divert at the right times? Were they able to store that amount of water? And so we identified that as a potential obstructing factor. The NRCS said, okay, let's shelve this while we seek out the answers. So it was an opportunity for the sponsor, again, to be proactive and solve the problem that we saw being a major showstopper at that point. We also had this PIFR in Nevada. It was in Reno, Sparks area. I believe it was intended to be flood prevention. So there's a canal that runs through these urban areas. We just could not find agricultural or rural benefits. We couldn't look far enough downstream to find benefits of the project. We really tried to stretch the definition of agricultural to golf course grass. We just couldn't get it there. So that was one where the 20% rural benefits didn't look feasible. And that is one of the plans that we stopped early in the process because we felt like that was just an eligibility issue that we couldn't overcome.
Mm-hmm.
But obstructing factors in most cases provide an opportunity for the sponsor to figure out how to solve them before we're into planning.
Very
and
good.
then the last item in the PIFR is recommendation to the state con, and I will pass it to Blanchia.
Yeah, so who has the final approval for a PIFR? It's the state conservationists. After the PIFR has been prepared, it is reviewed and accepted by the state watershed operations program manager and the state technical lead. They sign on it, and then the state con can either recommend or not recommend a PIFR for further planning. That being said, after a PIFR is completed, we look at, are there any insurmountable obstacles that were listed in the PIFR? Is there, not an appropriate project sponsor? Does it meet the 20% ag benefit? Could there be controversy around a project that would stop it from being implemented? These are things you want to address and make sure in your PIFR. After it's completed, NRCS, we can do a state ranking on what PIFRs we want to move forward with. and then it can get recommended for planning. A key important thing is sponsor commitment is key in this planning process. When we have sponsors who are active and engaged, the projects run so much smoother with a committed sponsor. This program is a marathon. It's going to be long, it's going to be challenging. It's helpful if the sponsor is willing and excited to run this marathon with us. When sponsors work in a collaborative and enthusiastic effort, it sets up the next phases for success.
And one of our early questions asked, has the PIFR process been valuable in screening out projects that may have otherwise made it to the assessment and planning phase? You know, generally, we can find a reasonable project with most PIFRs. I think what I most commonly see is that we will rule out individual project measures that may not fit. So the planning effort probably starts in a better place if you've already ruled those out. I mean, it doesn't necessarily change the NEPA process or expedite that process, but it can reduce the risk of, you know, oversight or surprises that could slow down the process. You know, for example, we've had cooperating agencies join the watershed planning process late that snarled things up for a little bit. They would have been identified in a PIFR. They would have been notified in a PIFR. So it might have solved some of those oversights in watershed planning. So it can be a valuable tool to start the next phase. We had another poll. What are the sponsor requirements? Assist in the locally led planning efforts, provide local cost share funds and or in-kind services to provide the required portion of total project costs, provide funds for continuing operation and maintenance actions. Here's the big one, D, obtain needed land rights, including the use of power of eminent domain if necessary. And then E, all of the above. And E is the correct answer, as we've talked through before. We'll have Darren close us out.
Okay.
For Darren, if we could, right before you close out, I do have a question that maybe would be good for the group to hear. Are there examples of NRCS ranking criteria or even a matrix that can be used?
That's a great question for Blanchet. It's really at the state level that those decisions are made.
Yeah, I would say it varies by state. I believe Utah might have something in place. Colorado, we're working on finalizing a ranking process for our projects. So it really just varies by the state. We tier it off, the local concerns that were put forth from our state counter agencies and try to tier it off of those.
Excellent. That's really state by state answer to that question. So it'd be hard to really approach that one, huh?
Yep.
All right. Back to you, Darren. Keys to a successful PIFR.
All right. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, team. So as we were coordinating, putting the final just polish on things, I was talking with the team and I asked them if we were to pick one key to a successful PIFR process or keys, what would it be? And we talked about several things, but it really boiled down to sponsor engagement as we talked about it. And there are multiple folks, entities involved in the PIFR process that have responsibility for sponsor engagement. It's not just the sponsors. They're new to this process. When you tell them, it's like Blanchet mentioned, it's a marathon. It's a long process. That can until they understand why, that can create a lot of different emotional responses, right? Anywhere from bewilderment to frustration and that that it's just not quick enough. So it's upon the NRCS representative who has the best relationship with the sponsor to start to educate them, to evaluate whether or not that sponsor is interested enough and committed enough to really stay the course. And so that initial evaluation is the NRCS folks have done that. We always ask that question when we're trying to, like, we get a batch of PIFRs, like, which sponsor do you think is most engaged, most excited, interested to move forward? And they'll sometimes rank the order or select the order of PIFRs and when they're completed based on that engagement. So you NRCS folks, know your people, know your sponsors. That's super important. And also educating them to the process and, understanding that there's 4 steps to this, from PIFR through construction, and then just trust overall. Sometimes, unfortunately, the NRCS is viewed as the feds, big government, big brother, whatever. But they also have some great programs, and their interest is in helping put their funds to the best use, those public funds to the best use. And so when we get on common ground like that, to where there's trust, and the NRCS folks do that up front, super helpful. Consultants have responsibilities. This is both the consultant completing the PIFR, and if there have been consultants involved in helping the sponsor, a different consultant helping the sponsor determine alternatives, think through their actual needs, do some planning and whatnot. Communication's huge for everyone, and understanding that schedule. 90 days is quick, like that's super aggressive, and everything needs to click. And we need to, for example, have data upfront and timely. If it comes in when we're almost finished with the PIFR and it's well, what about this information? Would this be helpful? It's really hard to back up and reevaluate, and causes rework and schedule loss. The consultant has the job of understanding through the sponsor's eyes all aspects of their needs, the why, the ideal win, and then presenting that in the PIFR accurately and concisely, objectively, and without bias. So that's super important, that the consultant helps the sponsor be engaged by understanding them and presenting their information clearly. Of course, the sponsor has responsibility in being engaged as well. As you can see, there needs to be accountability to the schedule, to those milestones, reviews if they're involved in providing any level of review. Most importantly, probably in identifying early and communicating with stakeholders. Stakeholders, when they're all identified and they're, what they bring to the table is put forth, what, if they bring land rights, if they bring potential funding, if they bring other interested parties, all those add credibility to a PIFR and to overall engagement from that area that the project would benefit. And then lastly, but not at all least important, is just seeking that healthy partnership with the NRCS. Like B said, this is a marathon, and everyone needs to be on the same team and excited and interested in pulling together. So that's the responsibility of the sponsor, to have the right attitude and willingness to work side by side with the NRCS and their folks. So that's So overall sponsor engagement, and everyone has a responsibility and a role in helping that happen.
Well, very good, Darren. Thanks for those words and key to a successful PIFR. You know, this is the point in the webinar where I'm going to wrap back to our panelists, because there's usually something that when they go off the webinar and they say, "Oh, I wish I would have told the folks this," whatever that might be. So, Ricky, something that you just it may not have been in your formal slides or whatnot, but man, you just need to tell the folks this, whatever that might be. What might that be?
I'd just reiterate one comment I made, just that this is just a great program to facilitate those discussions and strategize on solutions. You know, oftentimes as an engineer, we're usually just interested in designing and constructing something, just get it in the ground, right? And this program just facilitates that partnership to have bigger and more lasting solutions work and just bring people together. And just my humble opinion, that's the great thing about the program. And it's also made working on these projects very enjoyable on a personal level, just the relationships that we get to build with individuals and how we see people just doing good things. It's fun to be a part of.
Thanks, Ricky. Jenna, that one thing that, geez, you wish you're about ready to, end the webinar, and this is the thing you wish you would have told the folks. Whatever that is.
Don't be afraid.
Okay.
It is a big process. It is a marathon, but you've got support. We're all in this together. Somebody will make it across the finish line.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. B, there is a question here that maybe you could help us with. Is there a database on Public Law 566 projects that have been cleared through the NWMC approval for purpose and need, or even completed PL 566 projects? Is there such a database out there? Or maybe Dan, you might know of this too. So let's start with B.
Yeah, I'm not aware of if there's a database, publicly available.
Okay.
When the National Watershed Management Center approves something, it's not completed yet until a plan is authorized by NRCS's chief. Once those plans are authorized, they're publicly available. You could Google search up plans that are approved. And so, yeah, I don't think I know of a database.
Okay. We'll search on that a little bit more. Thank you so much. And B, the one thing that you want to make sure that you tell the folks.
Yeah, I would definitely say, manage your expectations of the program. It is highly rewarding. There are, significant commitments that need to be made. And so, there is great reward. There is some cost to it. However, the benefits that come out is why we do these things, the personal relationships and the collaborative efforts to really bring a community of people together for their common benefit is highly rewarding to me. So
Thank you.
I've got.
And Darren, that one thing that you may have forgotten to say, now's a good time.
I think just that sponsor engagement and how important that is, that pretty much covered my one thing, to make sure we're all doing our part and that everyone working together makes for a great successful process. And this is, first step, and that opens the door to it is a process, a little longer term process, but opens the door to some great things.
So Dan and Tina, we're going to move to you here in just a bit. Want to make sure I didn't miss any of our panelists. We've had some panelists that have also worked on the questions and whatnot as we went along. I hope you enjoyed the Q&A system of Zoom, where you were able to see real life some of these responses to your questions that came in. In fact, let's use that Q&A thing right before we have some closing comments. And the one thing that you got today that was just extremely important for you to learn, go ahead and jot that into the questions and answer area in at your place. This one thing, man, that was so valuable to hear, and I really appreciate it. All right, Dan, let's have some final comments, and we'll finish with Tina too.
Thanks, Ray. Just want to express my appreciation to the presenters today, to Jones DeMille. The team did a great job. I always appreciate your air traffic control, Ray. But I hope that that you enjoyed and became a little more informed about the PIFR process. I would tell you that there is another webinar coming up soon on EWP. Would look forward to having you folks join us for that. But I do appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to spend time with the National Watershed Coalition and Jones DeMille. I'm especially pleased at the strong partnership I see with NRCS, Jones DeMille, and the recognition by both of the importance of watershed project sponsors. Those folks are our base, our bread and butter. We invite you to participate in the Watershed Coalition. As I said on the front end of this, our members are our biggest resource. So thanks for staying with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Dan. Tina, you get to take us to the finish line now as chair of the National Watershed Coalition, please.
Well, thank you so much. I reiterate Dan's sentiment in how much we appreciate everybody's interaction and feedback on these events and all the materials. So feel free to reach out at any time. We're looking forward to interacting with you guys and hearing your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. You certainly heard from a great set of professionals today. We thank you. I add my thank you to your attendance, your questions, your attentiveness to the webinar. We'll see you in 1 week from today. Is that right, Dan? For a NWC webinar on emergency watershed program,
Protection.
right?
Yep.
All right. Let's see you then. Thanks so much. We'll end the session today with a great deal of thanks to all of you. Take care.
See y'all.